this is Groundhog Day, because we were all just here yesterday, same time. But, anywho, I'm just delighted to have Bobbe McGinley up here to present to us. She's also attending our professional on-site today and tomorrow with Christine's group, and so she was kind enough to drive up a little early and give us this presentation. And I don't know if you had a chance to read her abstracts or bios, but we are very lucky to have her today. Bobbe has been working in the field of chemical dependence. I'm just going to read it.
Okay,
I don't know what to edit out. This could probably go on for hours. Bobbe's been working in the field of chemical dependency since 1988 and has built her practice working with problem and compulsive gamblers since 1996. Bobbe has been nationally certified to work with problem and compulsive gamblers and their families since 1999. Beginning her career at the Hazelden Foundation in Center City, Minnesota, Bobbe moved to Phoenix, Arizona as senior counselor at Progress Valley IV. 5? 6? 4? All right, see? Was addictions program director at Charter Hospital in private practice and was program manager clinician for Trimeridian Inc. Bobbe is now clinical director, counselor, and consultant at ACT Counseling and Education. Bobbe is one of the foremost experts on gambling addiction in our state, and her work in the field has made an immense difference in dealing with the growing problem of compulsive gambling. Says Chris Diamond, CEO of Calvary Addiction Recovery Center. Bobbe continues to reinforce both staff and clients here on campus and market the program services that are being delivered by our trained staff. Watch for articles written by Bobbe on our website. You may also contact Bobbe for information by ... and I guess you're going to tell us.
That's what it's all about.
Good. All right, on that note, thank you, Bobbe, and
You're welcome.
pass it
You're welcome.
over to you.
It's always, well, thank you for having me here, number one. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak to anyone about compulsive gambling and the whole family component around the gambling, because most people don't think it's a problem, number one, and if they think it's a problem, they don't treat it like they would a chemical dependency type issue, since there's no alcohol or drugs going into the body. So the mindset is, well, just don't do that, or don't go to the casino, or don't go to the racetrack, or don't bet on sports online. And we have 2 very busy days at my agency that most people dealing with other addictions don't have. One is March Madness. We get a lot of phone calls during March Madness where people are spending too much money or getting into trouble financially. Also during the Super Bowl, there's all kinds of issues. And then we're getting calls when the lottery gets up over whatever the lottery gets up over, and I'm like, to some of our gamblers, they tell me they have values, and they say, well, I won't go to the casino with less than $500 in my pocket, or I won't bet on the lottery until it's over $300,000, and I'm like, or $300 million, and I'm like, $1 million's not enough for you. I could go shopping or something. And they just, the way they think, the way they're wired is just really kind of fun to work with. So there's my first thing, is there any real winners? We call our treatment group the winner's circle. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek a little bit, using some humor to break through some of the shame around our gamblers recognizing the damage that they've done. And you'll see throughout this maybe what that means. Or not. Oh, wrong button. Did I mess anything up with the wrong button? No? Okay, so this is some of me. I have a lot more certifications than that. Don't let it scare you. There's combinations that work with different industries, so I just went out and got what I needed to make a living, and then found my niche. Okay, so you know where I started originally. I will tell you just a little bit of history about myself, and that is that I am 27 years clean and sober. I'm married to an individual, my third husband actually, will be married 38 years this August, who has the same sobriety date as myself, and was married to a compulsive gambler. So when I had the opportunity to start working with these people, I had a little insight from the family part of the issue. That particular husband was also an alcoholic and an addict, so the gambling piece stayed really hidden until the finances started getting more known or more obvious to me. A little bit of history on gambling. I'm not going to go over all of this, but for those of you that want to pursue more information or do any online Googling or anything, there's some basic information for you. And I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go through these as I share with you what I know and hopefully give you a chance to ask me some questions or share anything that you may have experienced with gamblers or family members of gamblers. One of the things that I do want you to understand, hopefully, is that this is a very hidden addiction. You can't test for gambling. You're not going to smell a deck of cards on one of your clients or on a family member. You can't use the urine drug screen or the blood test or the breathalyzer to figure out whether they have been gambling. And by the time gamblers come into treatment, they are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. We're not seeing $50,000 in debt. We're seeing huge, huge amounts. And there's some other things too I'll probably break into for you. Okay. When I first came out to Arizona from Minnesota in 1989, we had Fort McDowell, we had Bucky's Casino, which is near Cottonwood, I think. There was another casino that was far out there that took me years to find. And then we had some others in town that were like in these Quonset bubble tent type things. Today, we have casinos that have elaborate spas, hotels, golf courses. How many of you have been in any of the casinos in Arizona? Okay. Well, quite a few, actually. I'm not here to diagnose, by the way. That's not my job, I'm just giving you information. But the more casinos that there are in any given state, or the closer that they are together, obviously, the more people are going to visit the casino, and therefore the more people may start getting into some trouble. Now, everyone that gets into trouble is not necessarily a pathological or a compulsive gambler. Many of us recognize that something's not quite right, that we went for an hour and a half with folks for the buffet or whatever, and then we ended up cashing a check to stay a little longer, or using a credit card to get a cash advance to stay a little longer, and see that for the flag it might actually represent. So it's like, no, I hadn't intended to do that, I was only going to spend $50 or whatever, and stop, and we're good. Those are not the people that I see. They are not people that come in and meet criteria to be in treatment with us. They might be the family member, but certainly not the compulsive gambler. So what's problem gambling that leads to gambling addiction? There's a whole paragraph for you. Gambling is betting on any game of chance whatsoever. Okay, our compulsive gamblers have been betting usually since they were children. Not everybody, but this is the usual population that we see. Sports betting or being athletic, having parents that are very competitive. I wonder if we're going to see some of the adolescents coming in with soccer mom stories. We haven't really seen a lot of that yet. Most of the adolescents that we work with that have any relationship to problem gamblers are kids who are affected by their parents' behavior, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Here are some of the types of gamblers. I don't see the socials. I don't necessarily see the serious. Professional gamblers don't come in. A professional gambler, I have some young adults who fancy themselves as professional gamblers, but when you know what criteria is to be in treatment, you also know that they're not doing real well. I mean, they're not winning if they're calling me or coming in for any kind of treatment. I'm seeing the problem gamblers, and some of them just wanting to nip it in the bud, you know, kind of get a handle on it early. And then the pathological gamblers and antisocial personalities are somewhat intertwined with your problem and pathological gamblers. Type of gambling, action, there are two major types. We have the action and we have the let me see if I can remember without looking at my slide. We have the escape relief gambler, that's the other one, escape/relief, and that's going to come up as well. And the action gambler are usually men, but not always men. There are a lot of women who are really good at playing cards, and that's one of the action games. Can you think of some others? I'll give you that as a hint. What else would be considered an action gambling? Pool? Absolutely. Sports, slots are over the escape relief part.
Horse or greyhound?
Absolutely, horses and dogs. So we have a horse track in the Phoenix area. The dog track over by the airport is closed, doesn't mean it will stay closed. Horse track is still trying to get slot machines in there, but as long as the Native Americans have the compact that they do, they kind of have ownership on the slot machines and the card tables. So racetracks that have slot machines, racetracks of any kind that have slot machines are called racinos. And none of our governors are willing to go there yet. So we'll see what's going to happen. But so mostly men in action gambling. We have roulette is action gambling, sports, someone already said, card games, yes, any kind of horse or dog racing.
What craps?
Craps, absolutely, thank you. Any kind of dice game. And the reason why they call them action is, and this is coined by the gamblers actually, over the years, because they determined that you needed some kind of skill. So there's a lot of studying that goes on. Someone that is hooked on horse racing, for example, and we do get calls. We've got some calls over the Kentucky Derby that just happened. Also, one of the woman called us, and some of her jewelry went missing because her husband took it and sold it to make another bet. Somebody gave him some information, and he was out of money, so he took care of it. Those are not unusual types of stories that we hear, but. What did I say? I said roulette. Okay, so anything that takes some kind of action or some skill or some studying. In the sports betting, you know, they know the lineage of the quarterback. They know all the history. They know how many wins they've had and things like that. So it's a little bit different than our escape relief gamblers who play primarily our slot machines and video poker machines. Now, gamblers will tell you that it does take skill to play a video poker machine. How many of you ever played it? Okay. And what they say is, now a real action gambler says, well, that's BS, because you can teach a monkey to push a button. But the other gamblers, the video poker gamblers say, you need to know which game you're going to play, and you need to know which cards to hold and which to let go of, so it does take a certain amount of skill. Basically, slot machines and video poker machines have a chip in it that is programmed to pay when it's programmed to pay. So no amount of studying and skill, and no amount of, if you've ever been in a casino, you see people do this, and they do all kinds of things there with the machines, hoping that they're going to pay. They don't do that at card tables because they would be asked to leave. But our machine players have all kinds of rituals that supposedly are supposed to give them good mojo. And then we have the relationship between the action gambler and the type of drugs that you would primarily see with them would be the upper type drugs. You know, it'd be the cocaine, it'd be the crystal meth, be drugs of that kind of nature. And then on the escape relief gamblers, you've got the alcohol and the opiates, primarily, okay? So for the young people, we can actually see that coming. So we've got the uppers and the downers, and then we've got what we call the all-arounders, which are kind of the sedentary type gambling, which would be bingo and keno. Lottery, you know, I mean, even if they're your numbers that you play in the lottery with, it's still not really skillful. It's luck of the draw type stuff. So, and the gamblers in the group will actually argue about who has got skill and who doesn't, and then we just have to remind them where they are. Look around, you're in the winner's circle, right? We kind of have some fun with that. So let's see, these are some of the games that are played. Let's see if we missed anything. Sweepstakes. Sweepstakes is an interesting dynamic for our senior citizens or early retired individuals. We have a lot of folks way older than me, actually, who get caught up in that gambling with sweepstakes. And the other thing that they will do is online shopping. And sometimes that online shopping, there's two sides to that particular thing. If you've got someone who lives alone and is pretty isolated, They shop so that they have interaction from the UPS delivery person, and this is a true story. And then they wait a little while, and then they send back some of what they purchased so that they have that ongoing interaction with people. And they either have no children or the children are spread out across the country. So we see seniors with that kind of history come in. Areas that are affected, all of them. I tried to list them. I don't know what I could have missed here. But every area is affected. And one of the things, you know, like I said, you can't test for gambling like you can for alcohol or drugs. It's a very hidden addiction. So we've got family members that come in. The gambler is not reported for any kind of treatment or called to get any information. A family member will call when they find out that there is a foreclosure on the home as a direct result of non-payment. Okay. And they're absolutely devastated. So another thing that I didn't really use slides on this or anything, but I think is good information for you to have is when the family member recognizes that this has happened, we're seeing more domestic violence that they're actually talking about. And I think that when I first started working with gamblers 16 years ago, that was already occurring, but people weren't as comfortable talking about that kind of behavior happening in the home. Whether it's the gambler that is battery on the spouse, or the spouse when they figure out where they are in terms of financial issues that is actually perpetrating battery on the gambling person. We have had, and I mentioned this to you for a moment, the first adolescent that I met with probably 11 and a half years ago or so was a 13-year-old girl who had attempted suicide a couple of times, and someone had gotten my name and called me. And this young person looked me straight in the face and said, "I would rather be dead than deal another day with my mother's gambling." It was absolutely heart-wrenching. She had 2 younger siblings, and Mom was a single mom. And originally it wasn't an issue, and Mom would win a little bit of money and come home and take the kids out and, you know, for dinner and buffet, and they would do different things together. Or she would give the 13-year-old some money or ask her what she would like, and she'd buy her whatever she wanted, clothing, stuff. And everything was good. And then as Mom really got hooked on the gambling, she'd disappear overnight or not come home for the evening. And so the 13-year-old could not go to school because she wouldn't leave her younger siblings alone. And so this went on and on. And towards the end of this whole process, when she actually became that hopeless, she couldn't answer the phone because it might be somebody looking for money that Mom owes. Couldn't answer the door. She had a horrible time in school. I mean, her grades and her ability to even concentrate started declining greatly. Didn't want to go outside of the apartment because she didn't know how to explain what was happening to anybody. And started isolating herself, and eventually just became so hopeless that she reported to treatment. And we got Mom into treatment, and we worked with the whole family, and so far as I know, Mom is still off the bed, which is the expression of working with this population. It's not about abstinence as much as it is off the bed. So it's treated a little bit differently, and the language is a little different than for alcohol and drugs. But that was my first adolescent encounter, and I had a hard time initially listening to her and not wanting to just hug her and cry with her at that moment. So some of the severity of this addiction, we've got the brain chemistry things we have to look at. Most of our gamblers' denial process is very, very fortified, and they will clearly say to you, well, you know, at least I'm not an alcoholic or an addict. So I don't tell them that I am, obviously, but it's like, I get that part. And because we don't have that kind of consequence for them, they don't have the physical consequence like an alcoholic or an addict might, they stay out there a little bit longer. So by the time they actually come in for any kind of treatment, they're pretty damaged. Our young adults fancy themselves as our future professional gamblers. They are watching, you know, the gambling tournaments on television. They can tell you the carat of gold that some of those gamblers are wearing. I can't read their caps, but the kids can read their caps. And they just kind of see themselves as being there as, you know, big shots and doing just wonderful things for their family. An interesting dynamic about our gamblers, when they're really addicted to the process, before they've gotten in their car, gone to the gambling venue, placed their first bet, they have already in their mind won a lot of money and bought something. They've already gone on vacation, they've already got the cruise going on, they can imagine their family's faces when they come home and they say, oh look what, you know, I did a wonderful thing here and won all of this money. It's really an interesting process. And having said that, one of the things that I will tell you about my program is, after my working as long as I did as the Addictions Program Director at Charter, I also worked the IOP program. And I recognized for gamblers that group 3 times a week for 8 weeks really did not give them, in their mentality, an opportunity to do lifestyle change. So when I opened my own agency, it's group once a week, it's individual once a week, and then it's family or couples once a week for 24 weeks. So they still receive 72 hours of group process, but we give them enough time to breathe and either get regrounded at their job or find employment, because everything is so financial for them. You know, it's the one population that we have to address finances immediately and work, you know, over several weeks to figure out what's going on. What we don't want to do is bail them out or have a family member bail them out. Because what happens then? How many of you have ever had a hangover? Okay, how many of you have said, well, I won't do that again? So you didn't drink that, that doesn't mean you didn't drink again. Well, the gamblers have that same process going on, you know? So if I lose a lot at the slot machine, well, I just won't do that, I'll do something else, and they will, they'll switch. So gambling is a hidden addiction, there's no saturation point, it's difficult to spot, and they can work. They can work, I don't have that on there right on this slide, but there's less public awareness. I mean, everybody is still thinking that this is pretty innocent. And if you've got an addictive type person or an early recovery alcoholic or addict, they're very vulnerable to getting into gambling. Because their mindset is, well, at least I'm not drinking or doing drugs. And I'm not medicating, I'm not over-medicating on my prescription, which is legal, right? It's a legal lie. So this has got to be okay. You know, it's definitely less than, except if you end up homeless. So repercussions of gambling, it destroys relationships, of course, on every level. We actually, or I have been able to spot in our group process, if one of my gambling clients has this brain cell that fires, you can almost tell what they're planning, that they just thought of someone that they haven't borrowed money from, or someone that they haven't lied to yet, or someone that maybe hasn't caught them in a lie. There's actually a gleam that happens. And we stop process and ask them what they're thinking, and that usually is what it is. Well, you know, my Uncle Harry in North Dakota, I haven't seen him in 10 years. And he can help me get my mortgage payments in line. I know, they'll tell you if you ask them the right question. So it creates codependency, poor coping skills, obviously, and definitely poor communication skills are some of those things. They don't talk in full sentences by the time they get busted with their finances. And the interesting thing about gamblers that the 24-week mentality really works for is they don't remember losses as much as they remember whenever they have won. And one of the difficulties that they have is starting from the very beginning and saying, okay, well, I started with $500 and I won $800. And then I went back and I spent this and I won this and back and forth and back. And eventually we have to do some of that to get them financially straight and responsible for what they did. So it takes some time to do that. Some of the symptoms, they alienate people very quickly by borrowing money from them. We've had individuals lose their jobs because there are some boundaries set. There are actually policies and procedures set around borrowing money at the workplace. And one of those systems would be like Palo Verde at the nuclear plant. I had an Asian individual come in for assessment who actually resigned his position there rather than stop gambling. That's how addicted he was to that. But that's also a cultural thing for him. But he had borrowed money from coworkers and supervisors and eventually been confronted and decided to just leave the position altogether. There is a depletion of borrowing from life insurance. We had a woman who was a gambler. Her husband wanted to borrow some money from their life insurance policy. And when he called the insurance agent to find out, you know how you can do that, right? Back and forth. He called the insurance agent to see what they had, because they'd been paying on the life insurance policy for about 15 years, and there was a little bit of equity in there. And the insurance agent said, well, not only do you not have equity, but the premiums haven't been paid in 10 years. You have no life insurance. And the spouse had already done that borrowing to and fro and paid it back, and borrowed a little more and paid it back, and then eventually stopped paying altogether, thinking that the next big win. Now think about, how many of you have ever seen in the news where someone prominent has embezzled money for gambling? We recently had an individual from the National Guard, an officer in the National Guard, that borrowed $2.5 million. He didn't borrow it, he stole it actually. It's embezzlement from a fund that was set aside for family members of returning veterans. And it starts, if you were, I did not talk to him personally, I kept waiting for the call, because I have some military background, but they didn't call me. And he got a prison sentence as a direct result of that. But it starts with, well, I'm just going to borrow a little bit of money, and then they win and they pay it back, and it's back and forth, and eventually you can't pay it back. And so you keep chasing that loss constantly. And it's up over, a couple of $1 million. When do you stop? If you've got access to money, you're going to go as far as you can go if you're addicted to gambling. Does that make sense? I'm not ever going to hear about a person who maybe stole some money from work and got it back and then never did it again. Those are not the folks that report for treatment with me. We have PTO presidents who take money out of the school fund, to cover gambling debt. And then it was in the news, well, what they decided to do was have 2 signatures. So they go together. Well, now we need 5 signatures, because we can see them all getting in the car, right? It's just a different mentality. So you get somebody to co-sign with you, literally co-sign with you, and the gambler has no sense of what is that going to look like now that I have gotten you into trouble with me. That's not something that they're really aware of. They're just not. They want to stay in the game at all costs. And there obviously is going to be a loss of interest in regular or normal things. Problem gamblers start doing all vacations or all activities, even with family and friends, that are gambling related. Does that make sense? Okay. Back in the day, individuals would, and maybe you know this from your own journeys, would save enough money to go to Las Vegas, and you'd play and you'd stay overnight and you'd eat, you'd see shows and you'd do some shopping, and then when that money was gone or your 5-day vacation that was planned is over and you come home. Well, now the casinos are on your way to work, and, well, not here, you're pretty safe up here actually. But down by me in the valley, if you're running by it a couple of 3 times a week, and you're looking at it and you're going, gee, I wonder what it looks like in there, or you go in there and it feels very comfortable. I don't want to pick on casinos, but their marketing is just outstanding. There are no clocks in the casinos. You know that, right? Okay. There are no windows in the casino, except for the windows at the doors when you first walk in. Their customer service is outstanding. What do you need? I mean, before you even figure out what you need, somebody's asking to help you, and things like that. So people are drawn to some of that process. If you've had a really bad day, that's a good place to be. A high percentage of industry that get caught up in gambling are major sales, are auto salespeople, high-end sales. There's a lot of stress with that. You have to perform, you have to produce in order to survive. They will go to the casino and more likely be action gamblers. The other industry that runs right parallel to that would be the nursing industry. Because where do you go at 3 o'clock in the morning to unwind? Where can you go? And they are just really getting in, well, you know, I mean, and most of us know this that are working with compulsive gamblers, so we're going into different establishments and letting folks know that we understand that. We've got to find something else to do. And not everyone that gambles gets into trouble, and I really want you to hear that. Not everyone that drinks becomes an alcoholic, but those aren't the people we're treating anyway, right? I never did drink with a casual drinker, ever. I don't know where they were, but that was not my bunch of peeps. So, do my people gamble? I mean, if you continue to gamble despite consequences, that might be problematic. If a family member is saying something like, well, where do you keep going, you're disappearing. If an adolescent says to mom or dad, you missed my game, or you missed my teacher's conference, or you missed something that was important to the child, it's problematic. You know, it doesn't need to go on for 7 or 10 years. It's already creating some issues. If a person has attempted to quit and didn't, you know, made those promises to themselves, well, you know, I was able to put that money back into the checking account or the savings account and I didn't get busted, and so now I'm going to stop. If they go back and do it again anyway, or start saving money so that they can continue to gamble, it might be problematic. And then committing crimes to support their gambling. Now, if you burgle a couple of checks in the middle of your mother's checkbook without her knowledge, that's illegal activity. So it doesn't have to be about shoplifting and returning items for cash, although we hear stories about that. Excuse me, it doesn't have to be about stealing your neighbor's lawnmower 3 doors down and selling it to some guy 3 blocks over for money to get back into the game. It doesn't have to be that. Or stealing out of cars and homes, but we've seen that too. And there's not an age range in this. We really thought that we would see more home-type burglaries or car break-ins by young adults, and that's not so. The age of desperation is whenever you become that desperate. So it's not an actual group, it's not even an actual gender that we can nail. Girls are doing just, or women are doing the same type of activity. Women are a little more likely to stick somebody's jewelry in there, you know, and walk out the door with it from a friend or a neighbor or a family member. And men are a little more likely to take something a little bit bigger, but still across the board, it's everybody that gets that desperate. So here are some of our assessment tools, and the DSM-5, how many of you are kind of paying attention to the changes that are happening between the 4 TR and the 5? One of the things that is happening is right now in the DSM 4 TR, gambling is under impulse disorder, so insurance companies are not paying for it. And in the 5, it's under addiction. So part of the process of giving you some of this information is you might see people coming in newly addicted, and you need to start treating compulsive gamblers when insurance companies start paying for it. Remember I said at the onset here that it's a very hidden addiction. So since nobody's going to pay for it anyway, since it's very open and accepted in the community, since it's not really looked at as an addiction, our gamblers are staying out there and getting into more trouble a little longer than other addictions might. And you can't see it as well. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you just can't see it. If you go to a buffet, how many of you ever been to the Golden Corral? I just found one, by the way. I think that's very exciting with my grandchildren to do that buffet. I have to watch myself, but I just love doing it with the kids because they have fun exploring different food textures. But you can spot someone that may potentially have an eating disorder. Yes. If you're out in a restaurant or in a bar type scene or a sports bar or something like that, whatever reason moves you there, you can usually spot someone who may potentially have an alcohol or drug problem. You can't spot it on the gamblers. And even if they're making a lot of noise in the casino setting, you can't really tell if they have been there 5 days in a row and not ever left, which is some of what we see. Our senior citizens that usually get brought in by family members, when we mention to them that we have a group, say, well, how long is it? And I say 3 hours. They go, oh, no, I can't sit there for 3 hours. That they just came in with their adult son or daughter after being in the casino for 36 hours. Non-stop, sitting on a stool. You know, I mean, it's just crazy. Yes?
What about people you see that, like, everybody in the casino that works there knows who they are?
Yeah.
I just see that all the time. Like,
That they're very popular, or they know their name and stuff like
would
that.
that be an indication, you think?
It might be. It might be. There would be some questions that I would ask if I actually saw that. And I do, thank you for that. I do work with the human resource departments at our casinos in town and do trainings with them so that if someone were to be in the bathroom, for instance, the ladies' room or men's room, and say things about wanting to harm themselves or something like that, how to approach them and refer them or give them numbers to call and stuff like that. But that would be an indicator that this is all extended family. And because we're as spread out as we are, I mean, a lot of our adults that we work with, their family members are in different states. You know, I came from Minnesota to Arizona, so it's not unusual to hear that from other people. So they can keep it hidden a little bit longer, and the casino, and even the, how many of you have been to the horse track on 19th Avenue? Yeah, okay. It's very similar to that. It's sort of like Cheers. You've all seen the movie Cheers, right? The bar. Everybody knows everybody. So you know they're there a lot. And does that mean that they're winning? Not necessarily. Does it mean that they're losing? Not necessarily. But it may mean that they see that their betting or their gambling might be their second job. And it's not unusual for us to hear that kind of story either. Well, this is like a part-time job for me. You know, I have a job. But it's boring. So I go over here, you know, for excitement. So we watch some of that. People can get into trouble with something as simple as scratch-off tickets and lottery tickets, too. Did you have a question?
One of the disturbing things that I've seen recently is several years ago there was a little girl who the dad had taken her to the casino, and literally 3 in the morning this little kid still up roaming around. And a young man was there and started playing with her. Well, he was so oblivious because he was gambling, he didn't notice what was going on, and this little girl had developed this friendship with this young man. They found the little girl dead in one of the bathroom stalls. She was raped and murdered there because dad didn't even know. The other thing I remember, so I'm seeing more the child neglect. You know, they're bringing these children to the casinos. There was a baby left in a car because mom ran in, do a couple rounds, forgot all about her baby out there, and her baby was found in the car dead. So are you finding more and more of this kind of child neglect?
I don't know if it's more or more. I think we're talking about it more openly. We had a woman in the Valley probably around 9 years ago that left her 2 daughters in the car. Now, I met her before she went to prison. And her story, and so that's good, thank you very much for that, because it gives you an idea of the mindset. She had been at the casino with some girlfriends of hers the night before, and she spent more money than she had intended. So during the day while she was at her job, all she's thinking about is, oh my God, I cannot tell my husband that I did this again. How am I going to tell him that I lost this money? So she picked up her kids from school and went to the casino with the intention of running in, winning that money back. I mean, this is, you know what I'm saying? Now you're going to win it back in 20 minutes, what you lost in 20 hours, but that's beside the point. That's just their mindset, their framework. Win that money back so that she wouldn't have to tell him what she had done. Now, part of that is about some CYA, right? I mean, that's understandable. The other part of that is, if she had gotten away with that and security had not seen the children in the car and busted her, she would have kept gambling. The message to her would have been, well, then I can do that also. So now I don't have to wait for my girlfriends to say, well, come on, Bobby, let's go play for a little while, or let's go do some, a show or a buffet or something like that. You know what I'm saying? And that's the nature of addiction, right? Okay, that's the progression. So in that regard, it's very, very similar to alcohol and drug addiction. If a little bit is good, then more is better. Yeah, we had one of our other very sad stories here in the state of Arizona, besides the National Guard's guy and the woman I was just talking about, and the woman that lost the baby, is our youngest attorney and then youngest judge who got caught. Do you remember this story? Well, he was in charge. He was the fiduciary of several rather wealthy senior citizens' monies. And got caught up in gambling. Originally started with a suitcase of money that he would fly into Vegas and play and then fly back home. And he was winning. This is his story. I wasn't there. But he would play, and then he was playing here in town or, you know, down in the valley at our local casinos. And eventually borrowed money from one of the individuals that he was overseeing their accounts and won money and put it back. And so it's back and forth and back and forth. And eventually, one of the senior citizens' families was doing something and was overseeing the accounts and watching this money going in and out, back and forth, and then not being replaced. And that's how he actually got caught at that. But he did prison. He did prison. His wife divorced him. Comes out of prison, he's doing community service, and that's actually when I met him, because I was on the Arizona Council Board of Directors for like 7 years. So I was overseeing a little bit of his community service with us, and got out of trouble, met himself a woman, got remarried, everything is fine, right? We have no debt, okay. And he started gambling again, and he's in prison again. See, I mean, it is so addicting. The mindset is, if I'm not in trouble right now, then maybe it wasn't that bad. You see it with individuals who have DUIs. And they can stop drinking, or they can stop smoking dope, or they can stop using whatever it is they're using. And as soon as the consequence is resolved, as soon as they've gone to court, as soon as they've gotten the, what's that word? The interlock device off of their car, the mindset of the addicted person is, well, phew, see, it's done. It's not a problem. And so it starts just a little bit socially, and, you know, just kind of testing. It's all mindset, I think. So some of what we have available, I did not bring any of these things. You can go online to find them, or you can email me if you're interested in seeing any of the G20 questions, or the family member 20 questions, and it actually is headed with, are you married to or living with a compulsive gambler? They also developed an adolescent 20 questions, because kids are getting real caught up in this as well. And how many of you have high school kids that do casino night at graduation? Okay, good. I had a couple of grandkids, 2 granddaughters that lived with me for little spurts of time because their stepdad was in the Marines. And so I joined the PTO, and so what do you do for a living? And so I tell them, and this is my specialty, is compulsive gambling. And I am still, the kids are both graduated from high school, still getting emails wanting me to come in and help them put together their casino nights. And that's not what I do. I don't organize gambling. I treat compulsive gambling. And they just, you know, I go in and I talk to them, you take me off your list, and I get them anyway. It's amazing. So treatment for compulsive gambling. I told you everything that we did. At the top set there, we have to look at finances, or at least acknowledge it immediately. But again, we do not help them get out of financial trouble too early. They've got to sit with that for a little while, because if you absolve that problem, if you let a family member bail them out, and here's a situation, you have a young adult who's in college, for example, spent all of their textbook money, spent tuition, gambling, they owe some of their peers money. The family thinks that they're living, you know, in the dorm and they're not, so they might be living in their car or they're in somebody else's car and they sold theirs or whatever the situation is, the family wants to swoop in and take care of that for them immediately. And we have to stop them as best we can from doing it as a knee-jerk reaction to what is happening so that the gambler can recognize that it's a consequence and that family's not going to save them. As soon as the financial issues are resolved, the gambler really believes they don't have a problem. So we need them to rest with that a little bit and recognize how they got to that point before we try to solve the problem. Does that make sense? So we acknowledge it in the very, very beginning because that's usually what brings them in. And then with that, I will tell you that I have since year 2000 had first a subcontract, and now I have my own RFP, a contract with the Office of Problem Gambling to treat gamblers and their family members. Because their major consequence for us, besides being a little, you know, whatever, is finances. So they can't pay for treatment necessarily, but we ask them to make a copay as if they were using insurance with us. You know, insurance is not paying for gambling treatment, but they need to have some ownership in what they're doing. They're going to work a little harder. Free is not a good idea with this population. It's not good with alcoholics or addicts either, actually, or any addictive type process. Free is not appreciated. They don't do as well in treatment. They don't show up regularly in treatment. It just doesn't have any worth, so they're not going to work quite as hard. So we ask them for a copay. If they are unable to make the copay, that's okay. We would not treat them. But then it becomes a treatment plan issue, and we will visit it again in our 30-day redoing their treatment plan. What's that called? Never mind. You know what I'm talking about. I get ahead of, I'm like 3 thoughts ahead of myself for it. So we renegotiate with the copay. We like to start at $20. Some of our folks pay us $1 per service, but they have a financial investment, and somehow money now starts to have a little bit of value, because for the gambler, money is the drug. Doesn't have any value. It's the drug. And the similarity between compulsive gambling and eating disorders is the fact that you need money and you need food. So you understand that whole mindset. That's why this is kind of fun for me to teach you the gambling aspects, because you already know what you know, and it's primarily the same type of situation in terms of what they're thinking. So then we have treatment plan development. We look at the stressors, a lot of guilt and shame. Not unusual for our problem gamblers to come in with suicidal ideation. Not a lot of homicidal type stuff, but every once in a while there is some reciprocal emotions around a bookie that they may owe money to, or some friends that are badgering them to get their money back that they borrowed from. There is some really high anger with that. Suicide issues, most definitely. Depression, sometimes we need to. I have a physician that will check our folks out to see if medication is necessary. But I don't like to do that at the onset. We want to assess them when they first come in, but we don't necessarily want to medicate immediately unless we really need to. Family issues, we bring the family in as soon as we possibly can. Gamblers, just like our alcoholics and addicts, will tell us that their family members don't know. The kids don't know. The children definitely don't know. I mean, how would they know? I mean, I'm just gone a little bit. They think I'm working overtime. We bring the kids in and give them some instruction. We do some group things with them. We do some play therapy with them. And then we have the kids tell their gambling parent what they know. And it's amazing what they know. So we get them to a point where they're not afraid to tell mom or dad what this is like for them. And I always reflect back on the 13-year-old that would rather be dead than spend another day with her mother. It's not that she didn't love her mother. She didn't have a life in her perception, you know, and deserved one. So we give the kids a platform to let mom and dad know what this is like for them, so we can move them forward in a healthy manner. Does that make sense? Okay. Lots of codependency, naturally. We have family members that will call and say, I think my husband's a compulsive gambler. We say, let's bring him in here. He doesn't want to come. I said, well, tell him we'll rule out gambling because that kind of sounds less threatening, and bring him in. And then the family member is, well, you know, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe and they're backing off of it. And I'm not quite sure all the time where that comes from, but usually the gambler who is pretty good at sales has talked the family member into not continuing counseling because they're just going to quit and everything is copacetic. And of course we engage them as long as we possibly can. And get them to GA, which is Gamblers Anonymous, or for the family member it's Gam-Anon, like Al-Anon. So treatment plan development, all of it, you know. I have 3 different locations, and I had never intended to do that necessarily, but if you've ever been down in the valley, people who live in the streets will not cross Central Avenue to go to the west side, where the avenues are, and our Avenue West Side people in Glendale and Peoria and Sun City, where the bulk of our seniors and retired folks are, will not cross Central Avenue and go into the streets. Don't ask. I have no idea. So I ended up opening an office in Glendale because it was the bulk of our calls were coming from there. So, yeah. And then I have an office in Chandler as well. So we obviously do just what you do here, you know, maintain a climate of safety and respect. Some of our gamblers, tongue-in-cheek, want to know if we're going to give them odds, you know, for different games that are coming up in March Madness. And we'll get calls every once in a while on, you know, different gambling silliness. And I am, you know, at first I was insulted, and then I go, well, no, I can actually have some fun with this. So I do, and just kind of have some fun with it.
I thought you were going to say odds of treatment.
Yeah. Well, and people ask me that. What are odds of me getting well? You know, I mean, are you going to cure me? And I said, well, no, I didn't infect you. I don't have to cure you, you know. I didn't drive you there. Didn't give you your money to start gambling with. But anyway, we just kind of have some fun with that. Initial treatment plans, we're looking at these different things, and all of this gets lost in the addiction, obviously. You know, all of it is deteriorated just through the addictive process. Stress is everywhere anymore. There's so much, there are a lot of accidents around casinos. There is a lot of sexual activity around gambling venues. There are individuals that come to us where their shame is around gambling, but it's also around having been so desperate that they were willing to get into a cab with an 18-wheeler driver and trade sex for money to get back in the game. Men and women. And first it was, we saw a little more with women, but men are a little closed off from talking about these kinds of things unless you actually ask those kinds of questions. Have you ever prostituted or sold yourself for money to stay in a gambling venue, whatever it happened to be? And they're a little more open with it if you ask it directly. Obviously self-esteem issues. So many of our folks today with the economy are losing jobs as a direct result of their gambling. And then we have some individuals who see their gambling as their primary job. In other words, it's not unusual for us to hear from let's see, the last one I think was a husband who said, my wife hasn't worked for the last year, but she gets up in the morning and showers and gets dressed and leaves and comes home like she's working all day. And she's gambling. And how she was able to pull it off that long, I don't know. He I have heard from, she I have yet to meet, so I have a lot of questions to ask her about that whole process. But when the family member finds out what's actually happening, they're absolutely devastated. They are nailed emotionally on every single level. They don't know what to believe anymore. Their worth it just plummets as a direct result of having been lied to and fooled that long. You know, I mean, they're just devastated. Then, of course, we have our financial issues. We don't talk in terms of budgets because our gamblers get very angry about restricting them. So we talk in terms of spending plans. We put them on an allowance and hopefully we've engaged a family member. Sometimes with our seniors, we have to actually get a fiduciary, which is risky, with the lawyer story I told you. We do a lot of interview. But we'll ask a family member to help them for the duration of treatment, for example. So one of the things that we look at in terms of their finances is what exactly do they need in money in their hand to survive in a week. And we don't go 2 weeks and we don't go a month at a time. We start with 1 week. So if you come in and we determine you need $30 cash in your pocket for the week, at the end of the week, you need to turn in $30 worth of receipts. And if you only turn in $18 worth of receipts, you will only be reimbursed $18. You will never get the 30 again. Does that make sense? Because at some point in time, money has got to have some value, and we get tested all the time with this, all the time. And they'll say, well, I only have $25 in receipts. Well, we're only going to return $25. And we're working with the family at this point. So we have both partners there. And then they'll whip this other receipt out and say, well, I was just kidding. Here's my $5.02 receipt. I know, it's a gamble, right? Okay. I pass some of these tests. I fail at others. It's a learning process all the time. We look at their list of creditors. Our gamblers are notorious for getting hooked up with payday loan places. And the payday loan laws have changed. I like to believe that with Terry Goddard and myself that I had a hand in that, because I started faxing to him the loan agreements that our clients were coming in with on the payday loans. I don't care that there are payday loan places out there. That's not the issue. What I was advocating was that there be some kind of system where your office will tell your office that you both have me on loan. Does that make sense? There was no way for them to do that, and so I could get 13 loans. So I can't pay back the first one, so you know I'm getting buried. And there's a very high % for interest. So what I was advocating was that there be an ID process, that you went into your computer and put in my name and my ID, and you could see that I'd already taken a loan out with this other office. Does that make sense? And then you could say to me, well, you need to pay that one off. We'll be here when you need us. And it doesn't have to be ugly. But 13 loans at like 300% interest is nuts. You know, I mean, that's crazy. It's another form of gambling, actually. So they changed the rules around that, and then bankruptcies are bailouts. And some people absolutely need to file bankruptcy, but we don't advocate that or support it in the beginning of treatment. Because again, if there's no financial problem or consequence for them to think about, then they think their problem is solved or resolved, or actually what they mostly think is, well, maybe it wasn't that bad because, you know, I don't have a problem financially. So we don't advocate that at all. Some co-occurring disorders, you probably knew this when I started speaking. Suicide is very, very high with compulsive gamblers, and the only way we find out what actually happens in the gambling community is by other gamblers letting us know that so-and-so went to Las Vegas and blew their brains out on the 15th floor. Otherwise, we don't know. It's not in the newspaper as a rule. We'll find out through other GA members, Gamblers Anonymous members, family members will call and say, you know, this is what happened and stuff like that. A lot of criminal activity, I think I talked a little bit about that. ADD is an interesting dynamic, and our individuals who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD as children or as adults. Am I on my time?
You have till 1:30.
Okay.
Some folks
Oh
make-
boy, that's okay, that's all right, I just check it, because this covered the clock. Okay. They like these slot machines because behind the spinning of the wheels, there are these little lights that engage them, and they get absolutely mesmerized. Absolutely mesmerized. So we're finding that more and more with that population. And let's see here, growing number of, okay, our adolescents, yes.
Do you think those are inherently put there?
I'm sorry?
Do you think those lights are inherently put there to keep people mesmerized?
I'm not sure. I mean, they talk about, and I know this for a fact, the carpet is designed to keep people engaged. I swear when I go in to work with staff or human resources that they moved the bathroom since the last time I was there, so I have to walk through the center of the casino every time. It used to be at the door. Maybe I'm at the wrong door. I don't know. It's just really mind-boggling. I know they pipe the air in there to keep people awake and alert. There are some rumors about different scents that they use that keep people engaged and make them feel happy, so they're really not looking at the fact that they're $5,000 down on their wagers and things like that. So there are reasons, that people stay. Before you came in, we talked about the fact that there's no clocks in casinos, there are no windows in casinos, so people can very easily lose track of time. And many of us lose track of time when we're having fun anyway, when you're satisfied somewhere. You go to a restaurant, you've got great conversation going on, the food is good. You think you're there an hour and a half, it's 3 hours later, so it's not unusual for that to be happening there. Now the horse track, for example, is got a lot of windows and stuff, but there's a different level of excitement there. People are very noisy and boisterous and do a lot of silly things that they're pretty proud of. Some of our gamblers at the horse track are very aware of which horse they're betting on, and then you have a whole group of people that are betting on a jockey's pink silks. That's the zoot suit they're wearing on top of the horse, which has nothing to do with skill or whether they'll win, but just having fun with that kind of thing. And there was a rise in some horse betting for a while after Pretty Woman came out. Do you remember that section there? Okay. So there are different programs on television, there are different scenarios in the theaters that get people curious about that particular venue, and so they'll go in and they'll check it out. People are still celebrating their 21st birthday in Nevada. Now they don't have to go that far, but it's a different level of excitement, and the whole notion about what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas is still very exciting for young adults and people my age and older. There's really not an age limit on it, but I think the younger ones would rather be a little further from home. What was that show with the, I want to say The Bachelors, it wasn't The Bachelors, the one where the guy gets a tattoo on his face. What was it called?
Hangover.
The Hangover, that's, anyway. It's movies like that that are very, very enticing, that for people to kind of check out different scenarios. And those on probation, what do I put there? I can't even read my fancy. Yeah, part of our treatment. We do have individuals that are on parole or probation in our treatment program that have to pay back their debt. We want them to do that, and if they're unable to pay for treatment and we have them making a copay, or at least treatment plan that they make a copay, we're also on the list of people they need to pay. I think they should, I hate to use that word should, but I think it's important for them to understand that this is something that they need to have some accountability on. Does that make sense? If they don't pay us, that doesn't mean that they don't complete the program and that they can't stay off the debt. But it just needs to be looked at as a reality. So nothing is free. And to gamblers, everything is, actually. Yes?
So statistically, Asian Americans are less likely to seek treatment for any kind of psychological disorder, but I think statistically also Asians and Asian Americans are more prone to gambling as their drug of choice.
Yes.
Do you see more Asians seeking help, or is it still predominantly Caucasian?
It's predominantly Caucasian. And Asian individuals that do come in for treatment stay until their financial issues are resolved, and they don't necessarily complete the whole treatment process, if that makes sense. It's accepted. I went to Okinawa, for instance, where there is a military base, and in the military base in Okinawa they have casinos. It's a whole community there. The whole Asian concept is that this is an okay activity, but in the other countries, in Asian countries, they don't gamble like we do here in America. They don't gamble until their last dollar is gone. They gamble as a family. It's just looked on very, very differently. Does that make sense? Okay. So when they come here to the States, the person putting the spotlight on them is usually a Caucasian individual or friends or family that are influenced by American standards as opposed to the cultural aspects of Asia. They don't gamble till they're broke. They gamble because they can. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see, family issues, things that can be lost or damaged. Trust, absolutely, because there's a lot of lying, there's a lot of, to use a better word, gaming actually that happens with the families, and all relationships are on a foundation of trust. So when that kind of gets shattered, it's very difficult. Another reason why the treatment is 6 months long as opposed to 8 weeks. Stress, obviously, isolation. With our gamblers, it's not unusual to hear, like we have with alcoholics or addicts, well, then I'm gonna go drink with him and see what all the fuss is all about, and that way I can monitor their input and be there to observe and all that codependent good stuff. Well, the same thing will happen with the gambling frequently. Another population that gets into trouble gambling, though, are seniors or individuals who have been recently widowed or become widows or had a major grief situation, because it's an opportunity for them, if they have a propensity to gamble, to isolate themselves and do grieving on their own, in their own fashion. Does that make sense? I had a 72-year-old woman whose grown children brought her into us, whose husband and she used to play socially slot machines together, and they would just go when they felt like it. Let's go gamble today, you know, and it would be like 3 months ago that they were there last, or 6 weeks or something like that, and they would wait for 2 machines, they had favorites actually by the end of this story, and they would sit there together and they would gamble for a while and then they would go home. He was diagnosed with cancer, and throughout the whole process for him, as he lost his hair and went through treatments and stuff like that, in the casino, nobody ever said, "Oh my God, you're bald." "Oh my God, you're losing all this weight." "Oh my God, your skin is a different kind of color," and everything like that. They accepted him like he was just the person coming in the door with his spouse. Knew their names, obviously, by the time the end of the story happens. And eventually he did die. Now, she didn't gamble for quite some time afterwards. And then one day thought, well, she would go in there and sat at the machine that she usually sat at with him and got hooked on gambling, thinking that his essence was there. She felt very close to him in a spiritual way. So it was very difficult to talk her out of going. Does that make sense? Now the boys, she had 5 adult boys, were all concerned about what was happening with the money, because when Mom and Dad went together when he was alive, they wouldn't spend but maybe $200 if they lost. She was spending $1,000 because she was renting that machine to sit there as long as she possibly could to feel close to her husband. And that was, how she dealt with her loss. So with her, we didn't talk in terms of off the bat. This is one of the few times and early on for me as a clinician that I actually was working with harm reduction. So we cut her back, we made an agreement with her, we contracted that she would only go on this day and she would only spend this much money until eventually she recognized that she needed to stop on her own, and is still off the bat and running GA meetings out of our Glendale office. Yeah. Yes.
So it seems like there's overlay with criminal activities, and I'm just wondering, do folks have remorse about gambling? Or is it only that they were caught kind of thing? Or?
Initially it's because they were caught, but they're still invested in the mindset about gambling, and then the longer they can stay away from the gambling behavior, then the more real everything becomes. And they say things like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did that." That is so against their own values And so one of our major pieces that we need to do with them is to figure out if they were ever grounded with any kind of spirituality and get them back to that process again and recognize the difference between right and wrong. Because they've lost that in the middle of this addiction. It's not about that anymore. It's about chasing. You know, by the time they come to treatment, they are not winning money. They are losing money and doing everything to stay in the game to get back those hundreds of thousands of dollars that they've invested. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because they must be in a constant state of
Oh.
loss.
Yeah, that's why the program is as long as it is, because they remember when they won and they're trying to duplicate that process. And it's just like the first time that you ever got high, you never get that one again, no matter how long you drink or do drugs. That's done. Yeah.
And I think gambling is actually even more powerful than drugs because it kind of operates on that variable response interval. Whereas, you know, if you're shooting heroin, you know when you shoot heroin, it's going to alter your consciousness.
Yeah.
But I see gamblers going back, chasing that win, and there's a chance, but the only chance that they can have is if they're playing.
Yes.
And the only chance it can happen, you don't know when it's going to happen, so the only way to have it happen is to sit at that machine as long as possible, because the next one could be the one that you missed out on.
That's exactly right.
From a psychology perspective, that's the strongest bond to keep a behavior going.
Yeah.
Is that variable response.
Yeah.
So I think that's how dangerous.
And instant gratification. I mean, most of our gamblers have brat attacks. It's unbelievable. I mean, they act like they're 7 or 8 years old sometimes around this whole process when you tell them, well, you really need to stop doing that, or can you think about stopping doing that? No, you don't understand. You know, and they try to talk you into co-signing that behavior for them. You know, neglect of dependence, obviously, because if gambling is their major thought, then that's all they're going to do, is think about gambling. Where can I get that next dollar? Who have I not borrowed from? What do I have I can sell? It's not unusual for us to hear, and I'm talking about the 16 years that I've been working with gamblers and their family members, for a pregnant woman to come in after she's delivered her baby and say, I can't find my rings. I don't know where my rings are. You know, I took them off to go into the hospital, and they're gone. Or other heirloom pieces are gone. You know, things like that. If a family member comes in first and we haven't met the gambler yet, part of what we may do with them in terms of treatment planning is to ask them to take valuable things or precious things to them and give them to another family member until the gambler comes in for treatment and we can do this. Because they will just keep going.
So it dawns on me that, because we're about to do a panel on process addictions at our next conference with gambling and sex and eating with 3 different speakers, and they're going to be talking about similarities and differences. And you know, folks with eating disorders are really high harm avoidant. Like most folks with eating disorders would not typically walk up and ask somebody to loan money. You know, they'd rather get into trouble quietly on their own than that would be too confrontational. These folks seem pretty confrontational,
Yeah,
pretty
they are.
bold, like
They are.
almost fearless. Like that's why.
High ego, low self-esteem. Very high ego strength, because there is no saturation point on gambling, so they don't recognize how far they've actually gone either until you put that mirror in front of them. That's why group works better for them than one-on-ones. They really need to hear from their peers what that sounds like, and we do a lot of role plays around that. We'll give them situations that they need to argue to the group to protect themselves to continue gambling. We write the scenario, so it's not necessarily their true story, and it's less threatening that way. They'll come in with cardboard boxes that they have painted to look like a slot machine, and we'll argue with the group about why this is innocent behavior and better than shooting heroin, for example, or standing on the corner of Van Buren, which is where prostitutes walk. Some of the stroll is in that particular area, and that's how they'll sell that to their peers. And then hear how ridiculous that argument actually sounds. That they won't hear it from me as well or as blatantly as they hear it from each other. So yeah, there's a lot of confrontation actually that occurs. And we have a rack in every one of our group rooms that have bulls. They're stuffed animals, they're bulls. For when the peers hear BS, that they get to, you know, it's just a lighter way of making them work as hard as I'm going to work. And to confront each other with just a little bit of humor. And they'll say things like, well, okay, next week we need to bring our boots because so-and-so's doing their first step, you know? So, I mean, we try to make it a little bit lighter, but they're a little more blatant about their behavior, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know where I'm at with my slides here. So, distrust, employment, financial security obviously is going to be lost. Reputations are very difficult to protect because at that point in time there usually is some kind of illegal behavior. We've had gamblers who do not do drugs, never did drugs, are selling drugs to get money, illegal behavior, the trading sex for money business, and things like that, stealing from neighbors to support their gambling. Resentment and anger is a huge issue, and we're in the very beginning, it's hard to determine whether they're angry at themselves or getting busted. And it really is comparable until you get to know them a little bit and they recognize, you know, how badly they feel about themselves. Is my time up?
He's telling you your time's
On
up.
timing? I get it,
Cash is
okay.
in his-
Domestic violence, I talked about that a little bit, and again, whether it's the gambler perpetrating on the family when they get busted or the family member when they recognize that they're going to be homeless or whatever is happening. And other compulsive behaviors may begin, such as alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, porn. Other family issues, the children have a very, very difficult time, and they just feel really crazy about what's going on. They're not always sure what's happening. They know mom and dad might be arguing with each other, or mom and dad may be having some really loud conversations about an older sibling or something like that. Youth gambling information. High school students, when my granddaughters were over at Shadow Mountain High School, the oldest one had her appendix out, so I went in to get her homework assignments while she was home for a couple of days and walked through the cafeteria, and there's 2 tables of kids playing Texas Hold'em. All right. We know where our future addicts are coming from, right? I mean, we all know where they are. So I could just go to the school and hang out in the parking lot probably, but a little more about our kids with this. There's a heightened risk for suicide ideation and attempts when they get nailed, excuse me, with their gambling behavior, friendships and relationships. You can't carry on an addiction and be very outgoing unless you're trying to get people to give you money to stay in the game. Poor general coping skills because they become very introverted no matter how bright they are. 10 is the first report of gambling, and actually there was some illegal activity going on with that 10-year-old. Daily hassles, major traumatic life events. I have a daughter from the marriage between myself and a gambler who had said to me at 15 when I went into treatment, I will never drink or do drugs. She doesn't, but she's a gambler. It's an interesting dynamic when you look at some of that process. And she has had several relapses, is off the bet now about 1 year and 3 months, I think, this last go around. And because there's no saturation point, it's just easy. Tax money comes in, tax time, when the refunds start happening, our gamblers go a little bananas. So we try to keep track of some of that with them and give them some safety nets around it so they don't self-destruct. Some more youth profile. Gamblings that they engage in, internet gambling, horrible, horrible for our young adults in school, on any age group actually. And an interesting dynamic we're finding with internet gambling. Because it's offshore and it's illegal, if you win $50,000, they don't pay necessarily. And you have no recourse, because you don't know where they are. You used a credit card to engage in the game, however long you were playing with them. They just shut down their phone number and their website, and they get a new one.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So we have people that are suicidal as a direct result of having counted on that money because they have an investment. It may have cost them, excuse me, $100,000, and then not get paid the 50 grand, which is still not paying off the debt, but would be considered a windfall at that point in the gambler's mindset. and they can't collect, and they have no recourse. Women and gamblers, I'm going over time here, I apologize for that. Originally some fun, I told you about the nursing, that's men and women in that particular industry, it's not just about women. Gambling is affecting as many women as men. 16 years ago, our gamblers were primarily men, 55 and older Caucasian, and they were action gamblers, and now it's everybody. There is no real set anymore. Related to other issues, lots of grief. We have our SMI clients getting hooked up in gambling. It's just a really interesting process.
Probably need to pause there, if at all possible, or
Okay.
soon.
Yeah. Am I close? I think I might be close to the end, actually.
Okay, great.
So seniors, busing from retirement, communities to various gambling venues, still seeing it as fun, and yet then we have the retirement home calling saying so-and-so has confessed that they're in trouble. Some more senior profile. And you can get this so that you can read it, and my email and website is all part of my slides, so you can get that from me. I apologize. I never know how much information to bring, so it's never not enough, it's always in the 16 years, I really did well not to bring you everything I know. But anyway. So workplace performance things, you know, because you can't test for alcohol and drugs, our gamblers can actually stay at the workplace a lot longer, and they're not noticed as much. Some more workplace excessive use of sick days, trying to chase that last win they had or last loss they had. And financial signs. Stealing from the company funds, a lot of embezzlement. It's nuts, the mindset that goes with that. Yeah. Differences. Internet and online. And you can check out the study at the University of Connecticut Health Center around internet and online gambling. I know, I'm overwhelming myself. But anyway, it's a lot of information, and hopefully you'll ask your clients, because we've got individuals that are reporting to us with eating disorders of all manner related to gambling, and we don't know for sure which came first, which came later. But we ask them that. We do not treat at my agency eating disorders. We assess and refer. But if they don't get their finances straight, they're not going to be able to do much anyway. So we do what we can with that and engage family as much as we can and just keep going forward. Every addiction. Thank you so much.
Thank you.